Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories. First, let me share some happy news. I'm celebrating this Valentine's Day with Binta. When I asked her, "Are you ready for the most beautiful day?" she blushed and smiled so sweetly, asking, "Who is your Valentine?" That precious shy smile of hers warmed my heart. My precious hearts, my dear storytelling family, how I've missed you. Today, on this special Valentine's Day, my heart overflows with love for each of you. Tell me, my dears, how are you celebrating this day of love? Who holds your heart? Share your beautiful moments with me. Have you enjoyed our recent love stories? Did they make your hearts flutter with joy? Your happiness means everything to me. Let us begin with a prayer from my heart to yours. Dear Heavenly Father, today we gather as your beloved family of storytellers. Thank you for blessing us with this precious bond that grows stronger with each story shared. Bless each family member with hearts overflowing with love, joy that makes their souls dance, smiles that light up their day, love that takes their breath away, peace that fills their spirit, happiness that knows no bounds. Let each one feel cherished, treasured, and deeply loved today. Thank you for our beautiful family. In your loving name, Amen. Now, my beautiful family, shall we begin our Valentine's journey together? Open your hearts to love as we start our special tale. With endless love, your Mr. Peter. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the Manhattan skyline as Patrick King stood in his corner office, 48 stories above the bustling streets. At 38, he'd built King Technologies into a $10 billion empire, yet something was missing. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man others might envy. Tall, distinguished, with dark hair barely touched by silver at the temples. But his eyes held a loneliness he couldn't shake. The intercom buzzed, his assistant's voice carrying a note he'd never heard before. "Mr. King, Rosalie Rose is here for the operations manager position. Send her in, Claire." His voice was steady, betraying nothing of the sudden flutter in his stomach. He'd reviewed her resume countless times over the past week. Harvard MBA, brilliant recommendations, a track record of turning companies around. On paper, she was perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. The heavy mahogany door opened silently and time stopped. Rosalie Rose stood in the doorway and Patrick forgot how to breathe. Her dark skin glowed like burnished gold in the morning light, her natural curls arranged in an elegant crown that spoke of both pride and professionalism. She wore a cream silk blouse that contrasted beautifully with her complexion, paired with a pencil skirt that suggested rather than demanded attention. But it was her eyes that caught him, intelligent, determined, and holding depths he could drown in. "Ms. Rose," he managed, extending his hand while his heart thundered in his chest. "Welcome to King Technologies." She stepped forward, her heels silent on the thick carpet. Her hand met his, soft yet firm, sending electricity through his entire body. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. King." Her voice, God, her voice, rich and melodious, with a hint of something that made him want to hear her speak forever. Their handshake lasted a fraction too long, and when they both realized it, they withdrew simultaneously, a faint blush coloring Rosalie's cheeks. "Please sit." He gestured to the leather chairs facing his desk, using the moment she took to settle herself to regain his composure. Her perfume, subtle, floral with hints of vanilla, teased his senses. Patrick took his seat, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. He opened her file, though he'd memorized every word. "Your achievements at Goldman Sachs are impressive, increasing efficiency by 40% in your first year alone. I believe in understanding systems from the ground up," Rosalie replied, her hands folded gracefully in her lap. Was he imagining the slight tremor in her fingers? Every company has untapped potential. The trick is finding where passion and efficiency intersect. And where do your passions lie, Ms. Rose? The question slipped out before he could stop it, more intimate than he'd intended. She met his gaze, something flickering in those remarkable eyes. In building something meaningful, Mr. King. In taking what's good and making it extraordinary. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibilities neither dared name. Patrick stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Tell me what you see, Ms. Rose." She joined him, keeping a careful distance that somehow felt both too far and not far enough. The morning sun caught the golden undertones in her skin, making her glow. "I see potential," she said softly. "I see a city full of dreams and opportunities. And from this height, I see how all the pieces connect, just like in business. Everything affects everything else. The trick is understanding those connections and making them work in harmony." Patrick turned to her, struck by how perfectly she'd captured his own vision. She looked up at him, and for a moment, the professional masks slipped. He saw vulnerability in her eyes, a shy uncertainty that made her even more beautiful. She quickly looked away, but not before he caught the slight quickening of her breath. "The position requires long hours," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Late nights, early mornings, total dedication." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. King." Was it his imagination? Or did she emphasize his name like a caress? And personal life? The question was completely unprofessional, but he couldn't stop himself. "The demands of the job can be—" "My work is my life," she interrupted, then blushed deeper. "I mean, I'm fully committed to my career, no distractions." The way she said it, looking anywhere but at him, made his heart race. She was nervous, this accomplished woman who'd revolutionized operations at one of the world's largest financial institutions. Nervous and utterly enchanting. "The job is yours," he said suddenly, "if you want it." Rosalie's eyes widened. "Just like that?" "But we haven't discussed. Your resume speaks for itself. Your recommendations are impeccable, and your vision—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your vision aligns perfectly with what King Technologies needs." She stood straighter, professional mask sliding back into place, but her eyes sparkled. "Thank you, Mr. King. I won't let you down." "Patrick," he said impulsively. "You should call me Patrick." I prefer to maintain professional boundaries, Mr. King." Her voice was soft but firm, at least at first. The implications in that "at first" hung between them, unspoken but profound. Patrick nodded, respecting her choice while thrilling at the possibility it contained. "Of course, Ms. Rose. Claire will help you with the paperwork. You can start Monday." "Monday," she agreed. She gathered her portfolio, movements precise, but somehow uncertain. At the door, she turned back. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. King. I promise you won't regret it." The door closed behind her, and Patrick released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Her perfume lingered in the air, teasing him with possibilities. He knew, with bone-deep certainty, that his life had just changed irrevocably. Outside his office, he heard Claire welcoming Rosalie to the team, their voices fading as they moved toward HR. Patrick returned to the window, watching the city below, but seeing only Rosalie's reflection in the glass, the way the sun had kissed her skin, the grace of her movements, the depths in her eyes that promised so much more than professional excellence. He'd hired her because she was brilliant, qualified, perfect for the role. But standing there, still feeling the electricity from their handshake, Patrick admitted to himself that he'd also hired her because she made him feel something he'd thought he'd lost. Hope. Hope for something more than quarterly reports and board meetings. Hope for connections deeper than business partnerships. Monday suddenly seemed very far away. On her way to HR, Rosalie pressed her hand against her racing heart, trying to calm its thundering beat. She'd prepared extensively for this interview, researched everything about Patrick King and his company. Nothing had prepared her for the reality of him, the gentle strength in his hands, the intelligence in his eyes, the way he looked at her, as if he could see straight through her professional facade to the woman beneath. "Your office will be ready on Monday," Claire was saying, but Rosalie barely heard her. She was already thinking about seeing Patrick again, even as she reminded herself firmly that he was her boss, that mixing business with pleasure was dangerous, that she hadn't worked this hard to be seen as just another woman falling for her powerful employer. But his eyes, the way he'd said her name, the electricity when their hands touched. Monday suddenly seemed very far away indeed. Neither of them could know that this was just the beginning, that fate had plans for them that went far beyond professional collaboration, that all their careful boundaries and professional distances would soon be tested by a simple piece of paper delivered to the wrong address, carrying news that would change everything. For now, they were simply two people pretending their hearts weren't racing, their souls weren't reaching for each other, their futures weren't already intertwining in ways they couldn't begin to imagine. The morning sun continued its journey across the Manhattan sky, blessing the beginning of a love story that would become legend within the halls of King Technologies. A story of two souls trying to maintain professional distance, even as destiny pulled them inexorably together. A story that began with a simple job interview, but would end in a love powerful enough to overcome every obstacle in its path. But that was all yet to come. For now, there was only the lingering scent of vanilla and flowers, the ghost of a touch that lasted a moment too long, and two hearts beating in sync despite the distance between them. Chapter 2. Professional Distance. Monday arrived with the promise of summer in the air. Patrick arrived at the office 2 hours early, his heart racing as he reviewed the welcome package on Rosalie's desk one final time. Everything had to be perfect. He'd spent the weekend thinking about her, the way she moved, the sound of her voice, the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes. Now, standing in her new office adjacent to his, he could almost sense her presence already. The door opened quietly behind him. He turned, and there she was. Rosalie wore deep purple today, the color rich against her skin. Her natural curls were arranged in an elegant updo that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. She carried a small box of personal items, a framed degree, a crystal paperweight, a small potted orchid. "Mr. King," she said softly, surprise coloring her voice. "I didn't expect. I wanted to ensure everything was ready." He moved to take the box from her, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The same electricity from their first meeting sparked between them, making them both step back quickly. "Thank you," she murmured, a blush darkening her cheeks. She began arranging her things, each movement precise yet somehow uncertain. Patrick found himself mesmerized by her hands, elegant, strong, capable of rebuilding his entire company's operations, but trembling slightly as she positioned the orchid on her desk. "The senior staff meeting is at 10, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I'd like you to present your initial observations." Rosalie looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time that morning. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. "So soon? I haven't even—" "I trust your instincts." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning beyond professional confidence. She nodded, dropping her gaze. "I won't let you down." "You couldn't," he said softly, then cleared his throat. "I mean, your track record speaks for itself." The morning passed in a blur of introductions and orientations. Patrick found himself watching her through his office windows, the way she charmed every department head, how she listened intently to each employee's concerns. Her natural grace and intelligence shone through every interaction, making his heart race whenever she smiled. At the senior staff meeting, Rosalie commanded the room effortlessly. She'd already identified key areas for improvement, presenting them with a clarity that left even the most skeptical board members nodding in agreement. Patrick barely heard the actual words. He was too captivated by her presence, the passion in her voice, the way her hands moved as she spoke. Their eyes met across the conference table, and for a moment the rest of the room disappeared. He saw the same awareness in her gaze, the same struggle between professional distance and undeniable attraction. She looked away first, but not before he caught the slight catch in her breath. Late afternoon found them alone in her office, reviewing departmental reports. Rosalie sat at her desk, Patrick standing behind her, looking over her shoulder at the spreadsheets on her computer. Her perfume, that intoxicating blend of vanilla and flowers, wrapped around him, making it hard to concentrate. "These numbers don't align," she said, pointing to a discrepancy. Her voice wavered slightly as she became aware of his proximity. "We should." "Show me," he said, leaning closer. Her curls brushed his cheek, soft as silk. He heard her sharp intake of breath, saw the way her hands trembled over the keyboard. "Mr. King," she whispered, half turning toward him. Their faces were inches apart. Her lips parted slightly, and Patrick felt his control slipping. The phone rang, shattering the moment. They jumped apart like guilty teenagers, both breathing heavily. Rosalie answered the call with admirable composure, though Patrick could see the rapid pulse beating in her throat. He retreated to his office, closing the door and leaning against it. His heart thundered in his chest, his body alive with awareness of her just meters away. This attraction was dangerous, impossible, intoxicating. Through the glass walls, he watched her finish the call. She glanced his way, then quickly looked down at her desk, a blush staining her cheeks. The sight made him ache with longing. Days turned into weeks. They established a rhythm. Early morning meetings, late-night strategy sessions, moments of professional brilliance interspersed with periods of devastating awareness. Every time their hands brushed passing documents, every accidental meeting of eyes across the conference room, every shared elevator ride built the tension between them. Rosalie transformed the company with remarkable efficiency, but it was the small moments that tortured Patrick, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, how she bit her lip when reviewing complex data, the sound of her heels on the marble floors, approaching his office each morning. One evening, a month into her tenure, they worked late preparing for a crucial presentation. Thunder rumbled outside, rain lashing against the windows. Rosalie had removed her blazer, the silk of her blouse clinging slightly in the humidity. Patrick had loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves. The late hour and storm created an intimacy neither dared acknowledge. "The Asian markets are showing significant potential," Rosalie said, her voice soft in the dim office. She stood at the whiteboard, drawing graphs with elegant precision. "If we restructure our approach—" Lightning flashed, illuminating her silhouette. Thunder crashed immediately after, making her jump. The marker fell from her hand, rolling under Patrick's desk. They both moved to retrieve it, meeting on their knees in the confined space. Time stopped. Rosalie's face was inches from his, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted. A curl had escaped her updo, brushing her cheek. Without thinking, Patrick reached to tuck it back. His fingers grazed her skin, and he felt her shiver. "Patrick," she breathed, his name a prayer and a warning. The thunder crashed again, but neither moved. The air between them crackled with possibility. Patrick could hear her rapid breathing, see the pulse racing in her throat. His hand still hovered near her face, drawn to her warmth like a moth to flame. "We should." Rosalie's voice trailed off as his thumb traced her cheekbone. "Should what?" he whispered, leaning closer. A knock at the door sent them scrambling to their feet. The security guard did his rounds, oblivious to the moment he'd interrupted. "I should go," Rosalie said quickly, gathering her things. Her hands shook as she pulled on her blazer. "It's late." "Let me call you a car," Patrick offered, his voice still husky with unspoken desire. "No!" The word came too quickly. She softened it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, thank you. I need the walk to clear my head." She fled rather than left, her normal grace abandoned in her haste to escape the tension between them. Patrick watched her go, his body aching with the need to follow, to pull her into his arms, to finally taste the lips that had haunted his dreams for weeks. Instead, he sat heavily in his chair, head in his hands. This couldn't continue. The attraction between them was affecting his judgment, making it hard to think clearly. She was his employee, brilliant and essential to his company's future. He couldn't risk everything just because his heart raced every time she entered a room. In her own office, Rosalie pressed her forehead against the cool glass window, watching rain stream down the panes. Her body trembled with suppressed emotion, skin still tingling where he'd touched her. This was everything she'd feared when taking the job. The way he looked at her, how her professional resolve crumbled in his presence, the undeniable chemistry that made it hard to breathe when they were alone together. She'd worked too hard to be seen as just another woman falling for her boss. Her reputation, her career, everything she'd built could be destroyed by giving in to these feelings. And yet, the memory of his touch lingered on her skin. The way he'd whispered her name echoed in her mind. The look in his eyes when they'd knelt together in the darkness promised everything she'd ever wanted, but didn't dare reach for. Tomorrow, she would be professional again. Tomorrow, she would maintain appropriate boundaries. Tomorrow, she would remember all the reasons why this attraction was impossible. But tonight, alone in her office with the storm raging outside, Rosalie allowed herself to imagine what might have happened if the security guard hadn't knocked. How Patrick's lips would feel against hers, how his strong hands would feel drawing her closer, how it would feel to finally give in to the electricity that sparked between them every time they were alone. The storm continued through the night, but the real tempest was in their hearts. Two souls fighting an attraction that grew stronger with each passing day, each shared glance, each accidental touch. Neither could know that fate was about to intervene, that a simple mistaken delivery would soon shatter all their careful professional boundaries. For now, they remained apart, separated by glass walls and professional ethics, their hearts beating in sync despite the distance between them, their souls reaching for each other even as their minds counseled caution. The rain washed the city clean, but nothing could cleanse their hearts of the longing that had taken root that first morning and grown stronger with each passing day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new temptations, new moments of exquisite torture as they tried to maintain professional distance while their hearts drew them inexorably together. In their separate offices, they both stared out at the storm-dark city, thinking of each other, fighting the pull that grew stronger with each heartbeat, unaware that their greatest test and greatest joy was just around the corner. Chapter 3. Silent Signals. Dawn painted the King Technologies building in shades of rose and gold as Patrick stood in the employee flower shop, selecting the perfect bloom. He'd been doing this for weeks now, arriving before sunrise, choosing a single red rose, leaving it on Rosalie's desk before she arrived. Never a card, never a word spoken, but they both knew. Today's rose was deep crimson, nearly black at its heart, its petals velvet soft and perfect. Like her lips, he thought, then immediately tried to banish the image. These forbidden thoughts came more frequently now, especially after that night in the storm. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, his heartbeat loud in his ears. Her office would be empty this early, the lights still off, the air holding the stillness of early morning. He placed the rose in the center of her desk, perfectly aligned with her keyboard. His fingers lingered on the stem, remembering how her skin had felt under his touch. Hours later, hidden behind his office blinds, he watched her discover the flower. Rosalie's face softened when she saw it, her fingers tracing the petals with such tenderness that his chest ached. She lifted it to her nose, eyes closing as she breathed in its scent. The intimacy of the moment made him feel like an intruder, but he couldn't look away. She kept every rose he left. He'd seen her pressing them between the pages of her leather planner, carefully preserving each one. Sometimes, during long meetings, he'd catch her touching the planner, and he knew she was thinking of the flowers, of him. Their dance of unspoken attraction had become office legend, though neither acknowledged it. Patrick would find excuses to walk past her office, his steps slowing as he passed her door. Rosalie would linger after delivering reports, her hands smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her skirt, neither of them wanting to end their brief moments together. The staff watched, with barely concealed interest. Claire, his assistant, had taken to scheduling their meetings in the smallest conference room available. The IT department mysteriously lost the maintenance records for the executive elevator, leading to several instances of them riding alone together, the air thick with unspoken words. One particularly memorable morning, they found themselves sharing the elevator with a cart of office supplies. The tight space forced them close together, Rosalie's back nearly touching Patrick's chest. Her perfume surrounded him, that intoxicating blend of vanilla and flowers that haunted his dreams. He could see the pulse beating rapidly in her throat, could feel the slight tremor that ran through her when he shifted slightly. The elevator stopped suddenly between floors, the lights flickering. Rosalie gasped, instinctively stepping back into Patrick's arms. His hands found her waist, steadying her, and for a moment they stood frozen, her body pressed against his, both breathing rapidly. "Sorry," she whispered, but didn't move away. Patrick's thumbs traced small circles on her waist, feeling the warmth of her skin through the silk of her blouse. "Don't be," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. He felt her shiver, saw her hands clench into fists at her sides. The elevator resumed its journey with a jerk, breaking the spell. Rosalie stepped away quickly, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. When the doors opened, she practically fled to her office, leaving Patrick surrounded by the lingering scent of her perfume and the memory of her body against his. Their professional relationship remained impeccable. In meetings, they were models of efficiency, their minds working in perfect sync. Rosalie's innovations had increased company profits by 30% in just 2 months. The board was delighted, shareholders were ecstatic, and Patrick found new reasons to admire her brilliant mind, even as he fought his attraction to her beautiful heart. She began leaving him notes, not love letters, nothing so obvious, but detailed analyses of his proposals, showing how deeply she understood his vision for the company. Her elegant handwriting filled the margins of his reports, her insights making his ideas stronger, better. He kept every page she annotated, storing them in his private desk drawer, running his fingers over her words late at night when the office was empty. The summer grew hotter, the air conditioning working overtime to combat the heat. Rosalie took to keeping a small fan in her office. One afternoon, Patrick stopped in the doorway, transfixed by the sight of her. She'd loosened her hair from its usual updo, and the fan made the curls dance around her face. A bead of sweat traced the elegant line of her throat, disappearing beneath the silk of her blouse. She looked up, caught him staring, and the heat in the room had nothing to do with the weather. "The maintenance team is working on the AC," he said, his voice rough. "I can have them prioritize your office." "No need," she replied softly. "I don't mind the heat." Their eyes held, the fan whirring between them, stirring the air thick with unspoken desires. A drop of sweat rolled down Patrick's neck, and Rosalie's eyes followed its path. Her tongue darted out to wet her lips, and he had to grip the doorframe to keep from crossing the room to taste them. The next morning, he left 2 roses on her desk, one red, one white. In Victorian flower language, it meant unity, passion, a joining of fire and ice. He wondered if she knew, if she spent hours researching flower meanings like he did, looking for ways to speak his heart without words. Their casual touches increased, each one electric. Their fingers would brush when exchanging documents. Their shoulders would touch during presentations. Once, reaching for the same file, their hands interlocked for a brief, heart-stopping moment. The staff began a betting pool on when they'd finally admit their feelings. Patrick discovered this when he overheard two interns discussing odds in the break room. He should have been annoyed, should have shut it down, but instead found himself wondering who had money on August. Rosalie knew about the betting too. He caught her blushing during a staff meeting when someone accidentally played "Can't Fight This Feeling" over the conference room speakers. She'd met his eyes across the table, and for once, neither looked away. The heat in her gaze made his collar feel too tight, his heart racing beneath his carefully pressed shirt. Late one evening, he found a new note on his desk, written in her unmistakable hand. "Some feelings are too powerful for words." Below it was a pressed rose petal from the first flower he'd ever left her. His hands shook as he carefully stored it with her other notes, his heart full of words he couldn't say. They worked late more often now, finding excuses to share the quiet evening hours. Sometimes they'd order dinner, spreading reports across the conference room table along with containers of Thai food or Italian pasta. Rosalie would kick off her heels, curling one leg beneath her as she worked. Patrick would remove his tie, roll up his sleeves, trying not to stare at the elegant line of her neck as she bent over spreadsheets. One such night, she fell asleep on the conference room couch, reports scattered around her. Patrick watched her for a long moment, memorizing the peace in her face, the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the slight part of her lips. He draped his suit jacket over her, his fingers aching to brush back the curls that had fallen across her forehead. She stirred slightly, murmuring something that might have been his name. The intimacy of the moment nearly broke his resolve. He wanted to gather her in his arms, to carry her somewhere safe and warm, to hold her through the night and wake beside her in the morning. Instead, he returned to his office, leaving her to sleep peacefully under his jacket. The next morning, she returned it without a word, but he caught her pressing it to her face when she thought no one was watching, breathing in his scent. Their love story was written in these silent signals, roses and notes, lingering touches and heated glances, professional excellence masking personal longing. Every day brought new moments of exquisite torture, new reasons to maintain their distance, new opportunities to give in to the attraction that grew stronger with each passing hour. Neither could know that fate was about to intervene, that all their careful restraint would soon be tested by a simple piece of paper delivered to the wrong person. For now, they continued their dance of denial and desire, their hearts speaking volumes while their lips remained silent. In the quiet moments between meetings, in the soft light of dawn when he placed his daily rose, in the stillness of evening when she left her heartfelt notes, their souls reached for each other across the professional divide they'd created. Their love grew in the spaces between words, in the silence between heartbeats, in the moments between professional propriety and personal passion. The roses continued to appear, the notes continued to flow, and their hearts continued to beat in sync, waiting for the moment when all their careful barriers would finally crumble. Chapter 4. Almost Moments. The annual King Technologies Holiday Gala transformed the office's stark modernism into a wonderland of silver and gold. Crystal chandeliers had been installed for the occasion, their light catching on metallic decorations and turning the normally austere space into something magical. Patrick stood at the top of the grand staircase, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time, his eyes scanning the growing crowd below. And then he saw her. Rosalie wore burgundy velvet that seemed to absorb light and radiate warmth. The dress hugged her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor, a daring slit revealing glimpses of her leg as she moved. Her natural curls were styled in an elegant updo, tendrils framing her face, making her look like a classical goddess come to life. Gold earrings caught the light, drawing attention to the elegant line of her neck. Patrick forgot how to breathe. She felt his gaze and looked up, their eyes meeting across the crowded room. The chandelier light caught the gold flecks in her eyes, making them sparkle. A slight blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't look away. For a moment, the rest of the party disappeared, leaving only them, suspended in time and space. "Mr. King," a board member's voice broke the spell, "about the Asian expansion." Patrick forced himself to focus on the conversation, but his awareness of Rosalie remained acute. He tracked her movements through the crowd, watched her charm investors and encourage junior staff members. Her laugh carried across the room, making his heart race every time he heard it. The evening progressed with the inevitability of a dance, bringing them closer together, then pulling them apart. They circled each other like planets in orbit, professional obligations keeping them separated but unable to escape each other's gravitational pull. The first notes of a waltz filled the air. Patrick found himself moving toward her without conscious decision. She stood alone for a moment, watching couples fill the dance floor. "Ms. Rose," his voice was rough with emotion, "would you honor me with this dance?" Rosalie's eyes widened slightly. "People will talk," she whispered, even as her hand slipped into his. "Let them." He led her onto the dance floor, one hand settling at her waist, the other clasping hers. The velvet of her dress was soft under his fingers, her warmth radiating through the fabric. They began to move, and everything else faded away. They fit together perfectly, as if they'd been dancing all their lives. Her body followed his lead instinctively, responding to the slightest pressure of his hand. The slit in her dress revealed tantalizing glimpses of her leg as they turned, making his mouth go dry. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. She shivered slightly. Patrick. His name was both warning and prayer. They danced in silence after that, letting their bodies speak what their lips couldn't say. Each turn brought them slightly closer together, until he could feel her heartbeat against his chest, matching the rapid rhythm of his own. The music swelled, and Patrick dipped her gracefully. Time stopped as he held her, their faces inches apart, her throat exposed in an elegant arch. Her lips parted slightly, and he could feel her rapid breathing matching his own. The chandelier light caught in her eyes, showing him depths of emotion that made his heart ache. The music ended. They straightened slowly, neither wanting to break contact. Applause erupted around them, reminding them they weren't alone. Rosalie stepped back, her cheeks flushed, eyes bright with unspoken feelings. "Thank you for the dance," she said softly, then disappeared into the crowd. Patrick watched her go, his body still humming with awareness of her. His hands remembered the feel of her waist, the softness of her skin where his fingers had brushed her back. The ghost of her perfume lingered around him, tormenting him with its sweetness. The party continued, but they kept their distance after that. Too many emotions had been revealed in that dance, too many barriers had nearly crumbled. They exchanged glances across the room, each look weighted with meaning, with wanting, with impossible longing. Later, Patrick found himself on the balcony, seeking refuge from the heat of the ballroom. The December air was crisp, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. He heard the door open behind him and knew without turning that it was her. "It's cold out here," he said, shrugging out of his jacket. He turned to offer it to her, and his breath caught. The wind had loosened more curls from her updo, making her look wild and free. Her cheeks were flushed from dancing, her eyes bright in the city light. "I don't mind the cold," she said, but accepted his jacket anyway. It was too big for her, making her look somehow vulnerable and precious. They stood in silence, watching the city below. The music from the party drifted out to them, muted but still recognizable. Another waltz. Rosalie swayed slightly to the rhythm, unconsciously graceful. "About earlier," she began. "Don't." His voice was gentle but firm. "Don't apologize for something beautiful." She turned to look at him, her eyes full of conflicting emotions. "We can't." "I know." He stepped closer, drawn to her like a moth to flame. "But sometimes I wish." "So do I," she whispered. The wind picked up, carrying a few snowflakes. One landed on Rosalie's cheek, and Patrick reached without thinking to brush it away. His fingers grazed her skin, and he felt her trembling. They were standing too close now, the space between them charged with electricity. Her lips parted slightly, and Patrick found himself leaning forward, unable to resist the pull between them. A burst of laughter from the ballroom shattered the moment. Rosalie stepped back quickly, pulling his jacket tighter around her shoulders. "I should go," she said, her voice unsteady. "Early meeting tomorrow." She slipped back inside before he could respond, leaving him alone with the snow and the memory of how right she'd looked wearing his jacket. The party wound down slowly. Patrick made the rounds, thanking guests, discussing business, playing the role of successful CEO. But his mind was filled with Rosalie, the way she'd felt in his arms during their dance, the look in her eyes on the balcony, the tremor in her voice when she'd whispered, "So do I." In the quiet after the last guest left, he found himself standing in the empty ballroom. The cleaning crew worked silently around him as he stared at the spot where they'd danced. Her velvet dress had left a phantom warmth on his hands that he could still feel. Something caught his eye, a flash of gold by the balcony door. He picked it up, and his heart stopped. It was Rosalie's earring, probably lost when she'd rushed away from their almost kiss. The delicate piece of jewelry seemed to hold all the weight of their unspoken feelings. He placed it carefully in his pocket, knowing he should return it, but selfishly wanting to keep this small piece of her. Tomorrow, they would be professional again, maintaining careful distance, pretending their hearts didn't race when their eyes met across conference tables. But tonight he had danced with her, had held her close, had almost kissed her under the falling snow. Tonight he had seen in her eyes the same longing that filled his heart. Tonight they had shared almost moments that felt like promises of something more. The cleaning crew finished their work, leaving him alone in the dimly lit ballroom. Snow continued to fall outside, dusting the balcony where they'd stood so close to crossing the line they'd drawn between them. Patrick touched the earring in his pocket, feeling its delicate edges press into his fingers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new temptations, new reasons to maintain their professional distance. But tonight had shown them both that their careful barriers were crumbling, that their hearts were drawing them together despite all their efforts to remain apart. Their love story was written in these almost moments. A dance shared, a jacket offered, a snowflake brushed from warm skin. Each near miss brought them closer to the inevitable, to the moment when all their careful restraint would finally shatter. For now, Patrick stood in the empty ballroom, holding Rosalie's earring and remembering how she'd felt in his arms. Snow fell silently outside, covering the city in white, promising that even the hottest flames could be banked by duty and honor, but never truly extinguished. Their hearts beat in sync across the city, remembering their dance, their almost kiss, their whispered confessions. Tomorrow they would pretend none of it had happened, but tonight, they allowed themselves to dream of what might have been, what could be, what their hearts knew was inevitable. Chapter 5. Hidden Hearts. The spring sun had barely touched the Manhattan skyline when Patrick arrived at King Technologies, a perfect red rose in his hand. These early morning moments were precious, his only chance to leave his daily gift without being seen, or so he thought. As he approached Rosalie's office, he heard voices. The cleaning crew was early today. Panicking, he ducked behind a large potted plant, the rose clutched to his chest like a guilty secret. Through the leaves, he watched the cleaners pass, his heart racing at the near discovery. What he didn't know was that Rosalie had arrived early too, watching from the stairwell, hand pressed to her mouth to stifle her laughter. The mighty Patrick King, CEO of a billion-dollar company, hiding behind a plant to deliver a rose. Her heart swelled with love, even as she fought to keep quiet. When the coast was clear, Patrick emerged, straightening his tie with dignity, despite the leaf stuck to his suit. He placed the rose on her desk with usual care, then hurried to his office. Moments later, Rosalie retrieved her gift, breathing in its sweet scent while watching him through the glass walls, pretending to be engrossed in morning emails. Their dance of avoidance had become almost comical. That afternoon, they literally crashed into each other, rounding a corner, sending papers flying. As they knelt to gather the scattered documents, their hands brushed. The electricity between them was instant and overwhelming. "I'm so sorry, Mr. King," Rosalie stammered, jerking her hand back. "Entirely my fault, Ms. Rose," Patrick replied, his voice rough. They stood quickly, maintaining professional distance despite their racing hearts. Neither noticed Mrs. Chen watching from her desk, shaking her head at their obvious attraction. The next day brought new opportunities for their unwitting comedy of errors. During a crucial board meeting, Rosalie dropped her pen. Both she and Patrick reached for it simultaneously, bumping heads with an audible thunk. "Are you all right?" Patrick asked, rubbing his forehead. "Fine," Rosalie squeaked, mortified. The board members exchanged knowing smiles as the two most composed people in the company blushed like teenagers. Their staff had begun taking bets on their various escape routes. Patrick became known for his sudden interest in window maintenance. Whenever Rosalie wore particularly stunning outfits, Rosalie developed an uncanny ability to receive urgent phone calls, just as Patrick loosened his tie in the afternoon. One memorable morning, they found themselves alone in the elevator. The air crackled with tension as they stood carefully apart, both hyper-aware of the other's presence. Then the elevator jolted, nearly throwing Rosalie into Patrick's arms. "Did you arrange this?" she asked suspiciously, steadying herself against the wall. "Me?" Patrick looked equally suspicious. "I thought you might have." In the security office, the IT team high-fived. Their routine maintenance was working perfectly. The elevator remained stuck for 15 minutes. Patrick and Rosalie stood at opposite corners, making painfully awkward small talk about market projections, while their bodies hummed with awareness. When the doors finally opened, they practically fled in opposite directions. Claire watched them go, adding another tally to the office betting pool on when they'd finally admit their feelings. Their most elaborate dance occurred during a company-wide presentation. Rosalie was explaining quarterly projections when her laptop died. Patrick rushed to help, their fingers tangling on the keyboard. The entire auditorium held their breath, watching the visible spark between them. "Thank you," Rosalie whispered, looking up into his eyes. "Any time," Patrick replied, his voice husky. They stayed frozen for a moment too long, lost in each other's gaze. The spell broke only when someone pointedly cleared their throat, sending them jumping apart like startled cats. The security team had compiled a greatest hits reel of their near misses. Patrick ducking into supply closets when Rosalie approached. Rosalie suddenly becoming fascinated by potted plants when Patrick walked by. Both of them finding urgent reasons to stay late, only to spend the evening stealing glances through glass walls. One evening, Rosalie was working late, focused on a crucial proposal. She'd let her professional guard down, hair loose around her shoulders, heels kicked off under her desk. Patrick emerged from his office, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking unfairly handsome in the dim light. Their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, all their careful barriers seemed to waver. Patrick took a step toward her office, his intention clear in his eyes. Rosalie panicked, grabbing her phone. "Hello?" she said to the empty line. "Yes, of course, I'll be right there." She gathered her things with impressive speed, offering Patrick an apologetic smile as she rushed past. He was left standing in her doorway, watching her flee with a mixture of frustration and admiration. What Rosalie didn't know was that Patrick had seen through her fake call. What Patrick didn't know was that Rosalie had spent 10 minutes in the lobby, heart racing, fighting the urge to go back upstairs. Their game of professional hide-and-seek reached new heights during a company charity event. The staff had organized a scavenger hunt, seemingly designing every clue to throw Patrick and Rosalie together. They found themselves in the copy room, searching for the same clue. The space was tight, forcing them close together. Rosalie could feel the heat radiating from Patrick's body, could smell his cologne mixing with the scent of paper and toner. "Maybe we should," Patrick began, his voice low. "I'll check the 3rd floor," Rosalie blurted, squeezing past him and practically running for the stairs. In the security office, money changed hands. The betting pool now had subcategories for most creative escape and closest almost kiss. Their mutual attraction had become office legend. The maintenance team regularly forgot to fix the temperature controls, leading to Patrick removing his jacket or Rosalie fanning herself with reports. The catering staff always seemed to deliver only one set of cutlery with their lunch orders, forcing them to share or send for more. Even the cleaning crew got involved, accidentally locking them in the conference room one evening. They spent an hour reviewing reports, both acutely aware of the other's presence, until the janitor remembered the key. Through it all, their professional excellence never wavered. If anything, their shared tension seemed to fuel their success. Projects were completed ahead of schedule, profits soared, and the board couldn't have been happier. But in quiet moments, when they thought no one was watching, their true feelings showed. Patrick's eyes would soften when Rosalie laughed during meetings. Rosalie's hands would linger on documents he'd touched. Their bodies seemed to orbit each other, drawing closer, only to dance apart again. The roses continued to appear each morning, though Patrick's delivery methods grew more elaborate. He developed a complicated schedule of security camera patterns and cleaning crew rotations. Once, he nearly fell into a decorative fountain while diving behind it to avoid being seen. Rosalie kept every rose, pressing them between the pages of her planner. Each dried bloom marked another day of loving him in silence, of maintaining professional distance while her heart drew ever closer to his. Their staff watched it all with fond exasperation. The betting pool grew larger, the theories about what would finally bring them together more elaborate. No one guessed it would be a medical report delivered to the wrong Patrick that would finally break down their careful walls. But for now, they continued their dance of near misses and almost moments, of hidden roses and fake phone calls, of professional excellence masking personal longing. Their love story played out in silent glances and careful distances, in morning flowers and evening sighs, in all the spaces between what they showed the world and what their hearts knew to be true. Each escape, each near miss, each moment of carefully maintained distance only served to draw them closer together. Like stars locked in orbit, they couldn't break free from each other's gravity, even as they tried to maintain safe professional space between them. Their story was written in these moments of beautiful awkwardness, these elaborate dances of avoidance that fooled no one but themselves. Every hidden smile, every stolen glance, every carefully casual greeting added another page to their romance. Neither could know that fate was about to intervene, that all their careful choreography would soon be rendered meaningless by a simple piece of paper delivered to the wrong address. For now they continued their dance of denial and desire, their hearts beating in sync even as they worked to keep their bodies apart. The roses continued to appear, the escapes grew more elaborate, and their love continued to bloom in the spaces between professional propriety and personal passion. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are written not in grand gestures or passionate declarations, but in the quiet moments of wanting and waiting, in the daily dance of hearts drawing ever closer, despite all attempts to maintain distance. Chapter 6. The Fateful Report. The morning started like any other at King Technologies. Rosalie arrived early, the memory of Paris still lingering in her mind like a beautiful dream. She'd barely slept since their return, her thoughts filled with dancing under the stars, the warmth of Patrick's jacket in the rain, the way he'd looked at her in the candlelit church. Her office felt smaller somehow after Paris, the glass walls more confining. She could see Patrick in his office, engaged in an early conference call. The morning sun caught his profile, reminding her of how he'd looked on their last morning in France, standing on his hotel balcony as dawn painted the city gold. Claire's voice over the intercom broke through her reverie. "Ms. Rose, there's a courier here with an urgent document for Patrick. He needs to sign for it, but he's still on his call." "I'll handle it," Rosalie replied, grateful for the distraction from her dangerous thoughts. The courier handed her a thick manila envelope marked "Urgent Medical Results" in bold red letters. The name on the envelope read simply Patrick, with the building's address below. Something about the official medical letterhead made her stomach clench with unexpected anxiety. Back in her office, Rosalie stared at the envelope. As operations manager, she often handled confidential documents for Patrick, but this felt different, personal. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The first page bore the letterhead of Mount Sinai Hospital. Her eyes scanned the medical terminology, and the world stopped spinning. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. Advanced metastasis. 6 months. Terminal. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the report. This couldn't be real. Not Patrick. Not the man who filled her office with roses, who danced with her under Paris stars, who looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd never dared ask. Through the glass wall, she could see him ending his call, smiling at something someone said. He looked so vital, so alive. How could he be dying? How could the universe be so cruel as to show her everything she wanted, only to snatch it away? Memories flooded her mind. His hands steady on her waist as they danced, his laugh echoing in the rain-soaked church, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her across conference tables. 6 months. Only 6 months to memorize every detail, to store up enough memories to last a lifetime. The report slipped from her numb fingers, scattering across her desk. One page caught her eye. Treatment options, all marked palliative care only. The clinical language felt like knives in her heart. How long had he known? Was this why he'd taken her to Paris? One last beautiful memory before the end? A sob caught in her throat. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the sound, but her whole body shook with the force of her grief. All their careful professional distance seemed meaningless now. What were corporate hierarchies and career considerations compared to the precious gift of time? Through her tears, she watched Patrick move through his morning routine. He stopped to chat with his assistant, reviewed documents at his desk, made another call. Every gesture, every movement became precious, knowing they were numbered. How many more times would she see him adjust his tie? How many more morning coffees would they share? How many more roses would appear on her desk? The roses. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. He'd been leaving them every day, marking the passing of time with silent devotion. Had each one been a countdown? A way of saying goodbye without words? Rosalie's heart felt too big for her chest, too full of love and grief and desperate longing. She'd been so careful with her feelings, protecting her career, her reputation, her heart. Now all those careful walls crumbled like sandcastles before the tide of reality. 6 months. The words echoed in her mind as she watched him through the glass. He was on another call now, his face animated as he discussed some business matter that suddenly seemed completely insignificant. She memorized every detail, the way sunlight silvered his temples, how his hands moved as he spoke, the slight dimple that appeared when he smiled. Time became liquid, stretching and contracting as she sat at her desk. The medical report spread before her like a death sentence. Meetings were scheduled, calls came in, life continued its normal rhythm while her world shattered quietly behind her professional mask. She had to tell him she knew, had to tell him what? That she'd read his private medical information, that she'd been in love with him since that first interview, that the thought of losing him made it hard to breathe. The day passed in a blur of paperwork and presentations. Rosalie moved through it mechanically, her mind spinning with possibilities and regrets. Every time she looked at Patrick, her heart broke anew. How could he be so calm, knowing what he faced? How could he still smile at her like she was the sun rising over Paris? Evening fell, painting the office in shades of amber and gold. The staff began to leave, their cheerful good nights like daggers in Rosalie's heart. Soon, she and Patrick were the only ones left, separated by glass walls and unspoken words. She watched him work in the gathering darkness, his desk lamp creating a warm pool of light around him. He looked tired but peaceful, unaware that she knew his secret, unaware that her heart was bleeding for him. 6 months. The words pulsed in her mind like a countdown. 6 months to love him. 6 months to show him how much he meant to her. 6 months to create enough memories to last forever. Professional boundaries seemed like paper walls now, meaningless against the wildfire of her feelings. What was propriety compared to precious time? What was her career compared to the chance to love him while she could? The medical report sat in her drawer like a ticking bomb. Tomorrow she would have to face this reality in the harsh light of day. Tomorrow she would have to decide how to tell him she knew, how to bridge the gap between them before it was too late. But tonight she allowed herself to crumble, to feel the full weight of her love and grief. Tonight she let the tears fall freely, knowing that tomorrow she would need to be strong for him. Through the glass, Patrick looked up and caught her watching him. He smiled, that gentle smile that had captured her heart from the beginning. Rosalie smiled back through her tears, her heart breaking with the knowledge that their time was measured in months instead of years. The city lights twinkled below, reminding her of their last night in Paris. How many more nights would they have? How many more chances to dance under stars, to share quiet moments, to simply exist in each other's presence? 6 months to love a lifetime's worth. The medical report weighed heavy in her drawer, but her heart felt lighter with decision. No more holding back, no more professional distance, no more pretending she wasn't desperately, completely in love with Patrick King. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own heartaches. But tonight she had clarity. Tonight she knew exactly what she needed to do. Life was too short for careful restraint. Love was too precious to waste on fear. Through the glass walls between their offices, their eyes met once more. In that moment, Rosalie made her choice. She would love him completely, openly, without reservation. She would give him everything she had, everything she was, for whatever time they had left. The medical report had shattered their careful barriers, but from those broken pieces something new would rise, something beautiful, precious, and completely unstoppable. 6 months to create a love story for the ages. She was ready. Chapter 7. The night everything changed. Evening shadows lengthened across Manhattan as Rosalie stood in her apartment, heart racing. The black silk dress slipped over her skin like water, clinging to curves she usually kept hidden beneath professional suits. Her natural curls cascaded freely down her back, and she'd applied just enough makeup to enhance her features while maintaining a natural look. The medical report lay on her dresser, its words burning in her mind. 6 months. The thought made her hands tremble as she fastened a delicate gold necklace, the one she'd worn in Paris, the night they'd danced under the stars. Her reflection showed a woman transformed by love and desperation. Gone was the careful professional mask she'd worn for so long. In its place was raw emotion, vulnerability, and determination that made her dark eyes shine with intensity. The ride to Patrick's penthouse was a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. She'd never been to his home before, maintaining that last professional boundary, but Claire had his address in case of emergencies. This, Rosalie thought, certainly qualified as an emergency. The elevator rose smoothly to the top floor, each floor bringing her closer to the moment that would change everything. Her heart thundered so loudly she was sure the security guard could hear it as she signed in, but he merely nodded professionally and directed her to the private elevator. Standing before Patrick's door, Rosalie took a deep breath. The silk dress whispered against her skin as she raised her hand to knock. 3 soft taps that seemed to echo her heartbeat. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and there he was. Patrick had loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, looking casually elegant in a way that made her breath catch. His eyes widened as he took in her appearance, darkening with an emotion that made her skin tingle. Rosalie. Her name was barely a whisper on his lips. Without a word, she stepped forward and kissed him. All their careful restraint, all their professional boundaries shattered in that moment of contact. His lips were warm and soft against hers, surprised for only a moment before responding with equal passion. Patrick's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. The door closed behind them as they stumbled into his apartment, neither willing to break the kiss. Rosalie's fingers tangled in his hair as his mouth moved to her neck, drawing a soft gasp from her lips. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured against her skin. "Dreamed of this." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I've dreamed of you, too." They broke apart, just enough to look at each other. Patrick's eyes were dark with desire, but also filled with questions. Why now? Instead of answering, Rosalie kissed him again, pouring all her love and desperation into the contact. Her hands moved to his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. His tie came undone under her fingers, followed by the buttons of his shirt. Patrick's hands weren't idle, tracing the silk of her dress, learning the curves he'd only admired from afar. When his fingers found the zipper at her back, he hesitated. "Are you sure?" In response, Rosalie stepped back slightly. The city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows painted patterns on her skin as she reached for her own zipper. Patrick's breath caught audibly as the black silk slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet like a shadow. She stood before him in delicate black lace, her skin glowing golden in the dim light. Patrick's eyes traced every curve, every line, with such reverence that she felt tears prick her eyes. "You're beautiful," he breathed, stepping forward to trace her collarbone with gentle fingers. "So beautiful it hurts to look at you." His touch left fire in its wake as his hands explored newly revealed skin. Rosalie worked the buttons of his shirt with trembling fingers, needing to feel his skin against hers. When the fabric finally parted, she pressed her palms against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart. Their next kiss was deeper, more urgent. Patrick lifted her easily, carrying her toward his bedroom, her legs wrapped around his waist as he walked, her lips never leaving his skin. She could feel his heart thundering against her chest, matching the rapid rhythm of her own. The bedroom was awash in city light, the bed a canvas of crisp white linens. Patrick laid her down with infinite tenderness, looking at her with such love that her heart threatened to burst. She reached for him, needing him closer, needing to memorize every moment they had left. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I've loved you for so long. His response was to kiss her deeply, reverently, his hands painting patterns of desire on her skin. Every touch was a revelation, every caress a promise. They took their time, learning each other's bodies with exquisite attention, building passion slowly but inexorably. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of coming home. Their bodies moved in perfect synchronization, as if they'd been loving each other for lifetimes. Patrick whispered her name like a prayer, and Rosalie held him closer, trying to press the moment into her memory forever. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, neither willing to break the spell with words. Patrick traced patterns on her bare shoulder as Rosalie listened to his heartbeat, strong and steady beneath her ear. How could this heart be failing when it beat so powerfully against her skin? "Why are you crying?" Patrick asked softly, brushing tears from her cheeks. Rosalie pressed closer, unable to voice the truth yet. Instead, she kissed him again, putting all her love and grief into the contact. He responded instantly, rolling her beneath him once more. This time, their lovemaking was slower, deeper, filled with all the words they couldn't say. Rosalie memorized every detail, the way his muscles moved beneath her hands, the taste of his skin, the sound of his breath catching when she touched him just right. Dawn found them still awake, wrapped in each other's arms. The first light of day painted Patrick's skin in shades of gold and rose. Rosalie traced his features with gentle fingers, committing every line to memory. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "That I've never been happier," she answered truthfully, "or more terrified." He pulled her closer, misunderstanding her fear. "No one at the office needs to know yet. We can take our time, figure things out." Rosalie's heart clenched. If only time was what they had. But she couldn't bring herself to shatter this perfect moment with the truth. Instead, she kissed him again, losing herself in his touch, his taste, his love. The sun rose fully over Manhattan, painting their bodies in morning light. Patrick's bedroom overlooked the city, and Rosalie could see their office building in the distance. The sight of it didn't fill her with professional anxiety anymore. Nothing seemed to matter except the precious minutes they had together. "I should go," she said finally, though every fiber of her being protested the idea. "We have that board meeting at 9. Patrick pulled her back for another kiss. "Stay. We'll call in sick." The temptation was overwhelming, but Rosalie forced herself to sit up. "We can't. The merger documents need your signature today." He watched her dress with hungry eyes, reaching out to help zip her back into the silk dress. His touch lingered on her skin, making her shiver with renewed desire. At his door, they kissed one final time, deep, passionate, full of promises. "Tonight," he whispered against her lips. "Tonight," she agreed, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what she still had to tell him. The ride down in his private elevator gave her time to compose herself, to rebuild some semblance of professional appearance. But nothing could erase the memory of his touch from her skin, or the weight of unshed tears from her heart. In the lobby, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, lips slightly swollen from his kisses, a love bite carefully hidden beneath her hair, eyes bright with both joy and sorrow. She looked like a woman in love. She looked like a woman with a broken heart. The morning sun blessed Manhattan with another beautiful day as Rosalie walked the few blocks to her apartment to change for work. Each step took her further from Patrick's arms, but nothing could diminish the memory of their night together. They had created something beautiful, something timeless, something that would have to sustain her through the dark days ahead. For one perfect night, they had been simply a man and woman in love, with no barriers between them. Reality would intrude soon enough. The medical report waited in her office drawer. its cruel words unchanged by their night of passion. But for now, Rosalie held tight to the memory of Patrick's touch, his taste, his love. 6 months might not be enough time to love him as he deserved, but she would make every moment count. Starting with last night, she would fill whatever time they had left with enough love to last lifetimes. The city awakened fully around her, unaware that her world had been simultaneously made and broken in a single night. Rosalie touched her lips, still feeling Patrick's kisses, and smiled through her tears. Love, she was learning, was worth any price. Chapter 8. A Night of Truth. Morning sunlight streamed through Patrick's penthouse windows, painting patterns across tangled sheets and entwined bodies. Rosalie woke slowly, surrounded by his warmth, his scent, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply exist in this perfect bubble of happiness. Then reality crashed back. The medical report. 6 months. Her heart clenched painfully as she watched Patrick sleep, memorizing the peaceful expression on his face, the way his lashes cast shadows on his cheeks, the slight smile that curved his lips. He stirred, his arms tightening around her instinctively. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. His eyes opened, dark and warm with love, and Rosalie felt tears threatening. "Patrick," she whispered, tracing his features with trembling fingers, "I need to tell you something." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "That sounds serious." "It is." Rosalie sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. The morning light caught the tears in her eyes, making them sparkle like diamonds. "Yesterday, a courier delivered a medical report." Patrick's brow furrowed in confusion. "What medical report?" The pain in her voice was unmistakable. "From Mount Sinai, about the cancer, about the 6 months." "Cancer?" Patrick sat up fully now, concern etched on his features. "Rosalie, what are you talking about?" She slipped from the bed, wrapping herself in his discarded shirt. It smelled like him, and the familiar scent gave her strength. The report was addressed to Patrick. I opened it, thinking it was business-related. When I saw the diagnosis, her voice broke. "That's why I came here last night. I couldn't bear the thought of wasting any more time." Understanding dawned on Patrick's face, followed quickly by relief. "Oh, my love," he said softly, reaching for her. "Come here." Rosalie allowed him to pull her back onto the bed, confusion warring with hope at his gentle tone. "You're not angry that I read your private medical information?" "Sweetheart," he said, cradling her face in his hands, "I'm not sick. I don't have cancer. The report must be for someone else." The words took a moment to penetrate. "What?" "I'm perfectly healthy," he assured her, wiping away her tears with tender thumbs. "My full name is Patrick James King. The report must be for another Patrick." Relief crashed through Rosalie like a tidal wave. A sob escaped her as the truth sank in. "You're not dying." "No, my love." He pulled her close, pressing kisses to her tear-stained cheeks. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." Rosalie burst into fresh tears, but these were tears of joy. She clutched Patrick tightly, feeling his strong heartbeat against her chest, knowing now that it would continue beating for years to come. He held her through the storm of emotion, murmuring soft words of comfort and love. When she finally calmed, embarrassment began to creep in. "I should have verified the name more carefully. I just saw Patrick and Mount Sinai's letterhead and you came to me," he finished softly. "You chose love over fear. How could I be anything but grateful for that?" She looked up at him, seeing the love shining in his eyes. "So, last night was beautiful," he assured her. "Perfect, and hopefully the first of many nights together. Fresh tears threatened. "I was so scared," she admitted. "The thought of losing you." Patrick silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his love and very much alive passion into it. Rosalie melted against him, her body remembering their night together, even as her heart soared with relief. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "Report or no report, that hasn't changed." "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it terrifies me." He smiled, that gentle smile that had first captured her heart. Being terrified together is better than being brave apart. Rosalie laughed through her tears, joy bubbling up unstoppably. She felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from her heart. All the grief and desperation of the past day transformed into pure happiness. They spent the morning in bed, alternating between passionate kisses and quiet conversation. Rosalie told him everything, how she'd felt reading the report, the desperation that had driven her to his door, the need to memorize every moment. "I kept thinking about Paris," she admitted, tracing patterns on his chest, "about all the chances we'd missed, all the moments we'd held back. The report made me realize how precious time is." "It is precious," Patrick agreed, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. "Which is why I don't want to waste any more of it pretending I'm not completely in love with you." The morning sun climbed higher, painting their bodies in gold as they loved each other again, this time without the shadow of grief. Every touch was a celebration of life and love, every kiss a promise of the future they would share. Later, as they shared coffee and croissants in his kitchen, reality began to intrude. "We should find the real Patrick," Rosalie said. "The one the report was meant for." Patrick nodded, pulling her closer on his lap. "We'll call Mount Sinai first thing Monday. Make sure the correct patient gets their information." "What about the office?" She bit her lip nervously. "People will talk." "Let them," he said simply, echoing his words from their dance in Paris. "I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you, unless ... He hesitated. "Unless you want to keep this private?" Rosalie thought about their months of careful distance, of hidden feelings and professional masks. "No," she decided, "no more hiding. Life's too precious for that." He smiled brilliantly, pulling her down for another kiss that tasted of coffee and joy. "I'll have HR draw up the necessary paperwork, everything above board and proper." "Always the businessman," she teased, then grew serious. "Thank you for understanding about the report, about why I came here last night." "Thank you for loving me enough to break all your rules," he replied softly, "even if it was based on a mix-up." They spent the rest of the morning planning how to handle the office gossip, when to inform the board, whether Rosalie should move to a different department to maintain professional integrity. But mostly they simply enjoyed being together, marveling at the twist of fate that had finally brought them to this point. "Maybe we should send a thank you note to Mount Sinai's filing department," Patrick joked as they finally dressed for the day. Their mix-up did what Paris couldn't. Rosalie, wearing one of his shirts over her silk dress, smiled radiantly. Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most perfect endings. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her skin mingled with his cologne. "This isn't an ending," he corrected gently. "It's a beginning." The morning stretched into afternoon, neither willing to break their peaceful bubble. They had calls to make, a report to redirect, an office to face on Monday. But for now, they simply existed in the quiet joy of being together. No more barriers between them. Love, they were learning, sometimes needed a little push from fate. A medical report delivered to the wrong Patrick had shattered their careful professional distance, but from those broken pieces had emerged something beautiful, a love story that would become legend within the halls of King Technologies. As the sun tracked across the Manhattan sky, Patrick and Rosalie remained wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the mix-up that had finally given them the courage to follow their hearts. Sometimes they realized the biggest mistakes led to the most perfect love stories. Chapter 9. The revelation Monday morning dawned bright and clear over Manhattan. Patrick and Rosalie arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital together, fingers intertwined, the misdelivered medical report secure in her designer bag. The weekend had transformed them. No more hiding, no more pretending. Their love radiated from them like a visible aura, drawing curious glances from hospital staff. "Patrick Smith?" The nurse at reception typed into her computer. "Yes, he's in the oncology ward, room 742. Are you family?" "No," Patrick answered, his hand tightening on Rosalie's. "We have his medical report. It was delivered to my office by mistake." The elevator ride to the 7th floor was quiet, both lost in thought. Rosalie leaned into Patrick's strength, remembering how this report had changed everything. His heartbeat under her ear was strong and steady, a rhythm she'd memorized over their passionate weekend together. Room 742 was flooded with morning sunlight. A man sat by the window, about Patrick's age but thin from treatment. His wife stood beside him, both looking up curiously as they entered. "Mr. Smith," Rosalie stepped forward. "I'm Rosalie Rose, and this is Patrick King. We have your medical report." Understanding dawned on Patrick Smith's face. "Ah, the missing report. They told me there had been a mix-up with the delivery." His wife touched his shoulder protectively. "We've been waiting for those results." Rosalie's hands trembled as she removed the report from her bag. "I'm so sorry. I opened it, thinking it was for my Patrick." Her voice caught on the possessive, making both Smiths smile knowingly. "When you say opened it," Mrs. Smith began carefully. "I read it," Rosalie admitted, tears filling her eyes. "And I'm so sorry for that breach of privacy. But I need you to know something wonderful happened because of this mistake." Patrick stepped forward, wrapping an arm around her waist. "The report made us realize life is too precious to waste. We'd been fighting our feelings for each other for months, afraid of workplace complications, but thinking I was dying." He looked down at Rosalie with such love that Mrs. Smith's eyes grew misty. "Love finds a way," Patrick Smith said softly, taking his wife's hand. "Sometimes it just needs a little push from fate." They sat together, sharing their story, how the report had driven Rosalie to Patrick's door that night, how their love had finally broken free of professional constraints, how the mix-up had given them the courage to follow their hearts. "And how are your results, really?" Rosalie asked tentatively, remembering the terror she'd felt reading that 6-month prognosis. To their joy, Patrick Smith smiled. "Much better than that report suggested. We started an experimental treatment program. The latest scans show significant improvement. That's what we've been waiting to confirm." Relief washed through the room. Mrs. Smith hugged Rosalie impulsively, both women crying happy tears. Their Patricks exchanged understanding looks, the kind that pass between men who love deeply and completely. "Would you join us for lunch?" Mrs. Smith asked. "I'd love to hear more about your love story." The hospital cafeteria wasn't exactly romantic, but it glowed with shared joy as they talked. Patrick and Rosalie told them about Paris, about the roses and hidden notes, about all the moments they'd almost given in to their feelings. "When I read that report," Rosalie said, her hand tight in Patrick's, "it was like the world stopped. All our careful professional boundaries seemed so meaningless compared to love." "Sometimes we need a reminder that life is short," Mrs. Smith agreed, "even when it turns out to be longer than we feared." Patrick Smith watched them with knowing eyes. "The real tragedy would have been letting fear keep you apart. My diagnosis taught us that every day is precious, especially with the one you love." They exchanged contact information before leaving, promising to stay in touch. In the hospital lobby, Rosalie turned to Patrick with tears in her eyes. "They're so beautiful together," she whispered. "So strong through everything." "Like us," he replied softly, pulling her close. "Love is stronger than fear, stronger than cancer, stronger than anything." The spring air was sweet as they walked back to the office, no longer hiding their clasped hands or loving glances. The city seemed brighter somehow, blessed by their joy and the Smiths' courage. "Are you ready for this?" Patrick asked as they approached King Technologies. "Everyone will know by lunchtime." Rosalie smiled up at him, radiant with love. "Let them know. I'm tired of pretending I'm not completely in love with my boss." The lobby fell silent as they entered together, his arm around her waist, her head held high. Claire's eyes widened, then filled with happy tears. The security guard grinned and gave them a thumbs up. In the elevator, Patrick pulled Rosalie close. "No more hiding," he murmured against her hair. "No more hiding," she agreed, reaching up to straighten his tie, an intimate gesture that spoke volumes. Their staff watched through glass walls as they walked to their offices, love visible in every gesture, every glance. Within hours, the news had spread through every department. Their love story, born from a medical mix-up, became instant legend. Late that afternoon, a delivery arrived, flowers from the Smiths. The card read, "Thank you for sharing your beautiful mistake with us. Love always finds a way." Rosalie placed the flowers where everyone could see them, a testament to the power of love and fate's strange workings. Patrick watched her from his office, his heart full of joy and gratitude for the mix-up that had brought them together. That evening, as the sun set over Manhattan, they stood together on his office balcony. The city stretched below them, full of possibility and promise. "I had HR draw up the necessary paperwork," Patrick said, holding her close. "Everything's official and above board." "Always so proper," Rosalie teased, then grew serious. "Thank you for understanding about the report, about why I came to you that night. Thank you for loving me enough to break all your rules," he replied, "even if it was based on a mix-up." The setting sun painted them in shades of gold and rose, blessing their love story that had begun with a mistake and blossomed into something beautiful and true. Below them, the city buzzed with life and energy. Somewhere across town, the Smiths were probably watching the same sunset, their love strengthened by battles fought together. And here, in their glass tower, Patrick and Rosalie held each other close, grateful for the twist of fate that had finally brought them together. The medical report that had started it all was safely delivered, its purpose served. It had broken down their carefully constructed walls, shown them what really mattered, given them the courage to follow their hearts. "I love you," Rosalie whispered, turning in Patrick's arms to face him. "No more hiding, no more pretending." "I love you too," he replied, his kiss tasting of joy and promise, "forever." The city lights began to twinkle below as day faded to dusk. Their offices behind them buzzed with excited speculation and romantic sighs, their love story already becoming part of company folklore. But Patrick and Rosalie noticed none of it, lost in each other's eyes as the stars emerged above Manhattan. Their love, born from a beautiful mistake, would become legendary within the halls of King Technologies, a reminder that sometimes the biggest mix-ups lead to the most perfect endings, or rather, the most perfect beginnings. Their journey had started with a medical report delivered to the wrong Patrick, but fate, it seemed, had known exactly what it was doing. Love had found its way, as it always does, bringing together two hearts that were meant to beat as one. In the gathering darkness, they held each other close, their hearts beating in perfect sync, their love stronger for the mistakes and mix-ups that had brought them together. The city spread out below them like a carpet of stars, witness to their joy, their passion, their perfect love story. Sometimes they were learning. The most beautiful things in life come from unexpected places. Sometimes a simple mistake can lead to the most profound truth. Sometimes love just needs a little help from fate to find its way home. And sometimes, in the end, there are no mistakes at all, only destiny wearing a different mask, guiding hearts together in its own perfect time. Chapter 10. Office Romance. Tuesday morning at King Technologies dawned with an air of anticipation. News of Patrick and Rosalie's relationship had spread through the building like wildfire, transforming the usual professional atmosphere into something electric with romance and possibility. Rosalie arrived first, wearing a deep purple dress that made her dark skin glow. The security guard winked as she passed, and the elevator operator couldn't hide his smile. Everyone, it seemed, had been waiting for this moment. The executive floor was suspiciously crowded as she walked to her office. Her door was already open, and she stopped short at the threshold. Her desk was covered in roses, not just one perfect bloom like Patrick usually left, but dozens of them in every shade of red and pink. "We all pitched in," Claire said from behind her, eyes twinkling. "Everyone's been watching you two dance around each other for months. It's about time." Tears threatened as Rosalie took in the gesture. Each rose represented a colleague who had witnessed their love story unfold, who had celebrated silently as they fell in love. Patrick arrived minutes later, stopping in surprise at the flower-filled office. His eyes met Rosalie's across the space, love shining clearly for everyone to see. No more hiding, no more pretending. "Good morning, beautiful," he said softly, drawing delighted sighs from the gathered staff. The morning's executive meeting was barely contained chaos. Every time Patrick and Rosalie's eyes met across the conference table, knowing smiles passed between the other executives. Their usual professional synchronicity now had an added layer of intimacy that was impossible to miss. "The Asian markets show promising growth," Rosalie was saying, but stopped when she noticed Patrick's tender gaze. "Mr. King, are you listening to the projections?" "Just admiring the presenter," he replied, making the entire room burst into good-natured laughter. During their lunch break, they discovered the staff had organized an impromptu celebration in the break room. Someone had hung fairy lights and scattered rose petals. A cake bore the message, "Finally," in elegant script. "We've been running a betting pool," admitted the elderly receptionist, Mrs. Chen. "I won. I said the holiday gala would crack your resolve." "Actually," Rosalie said, squeezing Patrick's hand, "it was a medical mix-up that brought us together." They shared their story, the wrongly delivered report, Rosalie's desperate night visit, the beautiful truth they'd discovered together. There wasn't a dry eye in the room by the time they finished. "It's like a movie," sighed one of the interns. "A beautiful mistake that led to true love." The afternoon brought a parade of well-wishers to their offices. Each person seemed to have a story about watching their love unfold. The security guard who'd seen Patrick arriving early with roses, the cleaning staff who'd witnessed their late-night conversations, the IT team who'd accidentally trapped them in the elevator multiple times. "Remember when you hid behind the potted plant trying to leave a rose?" laughed the mailroom clerk. "We have it on security footage." Patrick groaned good-naturedly while Rosalie giggled. "I thought I was being so smooth," he admitted. The board called an emergency meeting late in the day. Patrick and Rosalie entered hand in hand, ready to defend their relationship. Instead, they found champagne and congratulations. "We've been watching you two fall in love for months," the chairman said warmly. "Your work has only improved as your feelings grew. Love suits you both." HR delivered the necessary paperwork, already approved and filed. "We had this ready months ago," the HR director confessed. "Just waiting for you two to figure it out." As evening fell, Patrick and Rosalie stood together on his office balcony, watching the city lights emerge. The office behind them was still buzzing with celebration and romance. "I can't believe everyone knew," Rosalie said, leaning back against his chest. "Apparently we weren't as subtle as we thought." Patrick pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I'm glad we waited. Makes it sweeter somehow." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mrs. Chen, holding a thick envelope. "We have something for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. Inside was a handmade book titled The Love Story of Patrick and Rosalie. The staff had compiled photos, security footage stills, and written accounts of every interaction they'd witnessed over the past year. There was Patrick, leaving roses, captured by security cameras. Rosalie, straightening his tie before meetings. Their dance at the holiday gala. Stolen glances across conference rooms. Late-night conversations in the office. Every moment they thought had been private had been noticed and celebrated by their colleagues. "We've been documenting everything," Mrs. Chen explained. "We knew someday you'd want to remember how your love story began." The final pages were blank, waiting to be filled with future memories. Rosalie traced them with trembling fingers while Patrick held her close. "Thank you," she whispered, overcome with emotion. "This is precious." After Mrs. Chen left, they sat together on Patrick's office couch, going through the book. Each page brought fresh memories, new revelations of how their love had been visible to everyone but themselves. "Look," Patrick said softly, pointing to a security photo from months ago. "This was the first rose I left you." The image showed him carefully placing the flower on her desk in the pre-dawn light. Rosalie's heart swelled, remembering how she'd found it, how she'd pressed it between the pages of her planner. "And here," she pointed to another photo, "the night of the storm, when we almost kissed." The images told their story better than words could. Two people falling deeply in love while trying to maintain professional distance. Every glance, every touch, every almost moment had been captured and preserved. "We were fooling ourselves, thinking we could hide this," Patrick said, pulling her closer. "Our hearts knew from the beginning." The office had emptied while they reminisced, leaving them alone with their memories and the promise of future moments to add to their story. "I love you," Rosalie said simply, turning to face him. "I'm glad everyone knows now." "I love you too," Patrick replied, his kiss tasting of champagne and joy. No more hiding. They stayed late into the night, adding their own notes to the memory book, filling in details only they knew. The medical report mix-up would forever be part of their story, but it was just one chapter in an epic romance that had captivated an entire office. Outside their window, Manhattan twinkled like a constellation of earthbound stars. Inside, two hearts beat in perfect sync, surrounded by the evidence of their year-long dance of love and denial. The roses on Rosalie's desk filled the air with sweet perfume, a gift from colleagues who had watched and waited for love to find its way. Their patience had been rewarded with a romance for the ages, a love story that would become legend within the halls of King Technologies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new memories to add to their book. But tonight they simply held each other, grateful for wrong deliveries and watchful colleagues, for fate's mysterious workings and love's perfect timing. Their story, they knew, was just beginning. But what a beautiful beginning it was, blessed by mistake and miracle, witnessed by an entire office of romantic souls who had seen their love before they'd admitted it themselves. The night deepened around them as they sat together, surrounded by roses and memories, their hearts finally free to love without boundaries or fear. Sometimes, they were learning, the most beautiful stories start with a simple mistake and bloom into something perfect and true. And sometimes, love just needs a little help from fate and an office full of hopeless romantics to find its way home. Chapter 11. Love revealed. The news of Patrick King and Rosalie Rose's romance spread through New York's business world like wildfire. The Wall Street Journal's Society page ran a feature titled "Love in the Boardroom, a Modern Fairy Tale," complete with a photo of them leaving King Technologies hand in hand. Rosalie sat in Patrick's penthouse, reading the article with mixed emotions. The photographer had caught them in a perfect moment. She was laughing at something Patrick had said, while he looked at her with undisguised adoration. "They make us sound like a romance novel," she said, curled against Patrick's chest on his leather sofa. "Isn't that what we are?" he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. The powerful CEO and his brilliant manager, brought together by a medical mix-up. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting their intertwined figures in gold. Rosalie wore one of Patrick's shirts over silk pajamas, her natural curls wild from sleep. These quiet moments together still felt like precious gifts. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and business associates. Everyone, it seemed, had an opinion about their relationship. "The board wants us to do an official press release," Patrick said, running his fingers through Rosalie's curls. "They think it's better to control the narrative." "What narrative?" Rosalie shifted to look at him. "That we fell in love. That a medical report mix-up gave us the courage to admit it. That love can bloom even in the corporate world," he said softly. "That sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most perfect endings." The PR team had prepared a statement, carefully worded to maintain professional dignity while acknowledging their romance. Rosalie read it critically, her business acumen warring with her heart. "It's too cold," she decided. "Our story isn't about corporate merger language and professional protocols. It's about love finding a way, despite our best efforts to deny it." Patrick pulled her closer, remembering the night she'd come to his door in that black silk dress, grief and love warring in her eyes. "Then let's tell our story our way." They spent the morning crafting their own announcement, weaving together the threads of their romance. The roses Patrick left every morning, the notes Rosalie hid in reports, their dance in Paris, the medical report that finally broke down their careful walls. The announcement would run in tomorrow's paper, but today belonged to them. They had a more important visit to make first. Mount Sinai Hospital's oncology ward was bright with afternoon sun when they arrived. Patrick Smith sat in his usual chair by the window, looking stronger than the last time they'd seen him. His wife's face lit up when she saw them. "The lovebirds," she exclaimed, hugging them both. "We saw your picture in the paper." "We wanted you to be the first to know officially," Rosalie said, squeezing Patrick's hand, "since you're part of our story." They shared lunch in the hospital garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and hope. Patrick Smith's treatment was working better than expected, his prognosis improving daily. "Life has a way of surprising you," he said wisely. "Sometimes with bad news that turns good, sometimes with mix-ups that lead to love." Mrs. Smith touched her husband's hand. "When you have love, you can face anything." The truth of that statement rang in their hearts. Patrick and Rosalie exchanged glances, sharing a moment of perfect understanding. Back at the office, they found their staff had organized an impromptu engagement pool. "We give it 6 months," Claire announced cheerfully. "Less if you count from when you actually got together." Rosalie blushed while Patrick laughed. "Are we that transparent?" "Honey," Mrs. Chen said, patting his arm, "we've been watching you fall in love for a year. We know what comes next." The afternoon brought a stream of reporters requesting interviews. Everyone wanted to know about the medical report mix-up, about how they'd maintained professionalism for so long, about what finally made them take the leap. "Tell them about Paris," suggested their PR director. "The public loves a romantic backdrop." But Paris hadn't been their moment of truth. Their love story had bloomed in Manhattan's glass towers, in early morning rose deliveries and late-night conversations, in professional excellence and personal longing, in a medical report delivered to the wrong Patrick that gave them the courage to follow their hearts. As evening fell, they stood together on Patrick's office balcony, watching the city transform into a constellation of lights. Rosalie wore a cream silk dress that made her skin glow like burnished gold. Patrick couldn't stop looking at her, still amazed that she was finally his to love openly. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked softly. "Once the announcement runs, there's no going back." Rosalie turned in his arms, her eyes shining with love and certainty. "I don't want to go back. I want to go forward, with you." The city spread below them like a carpet of stars, witness to their love story. Somewhere across town, the Smiths were probably watching the same sunset, their love stronger for the battles they'd faced together. And here, in their glass tower, Patrick and Rosalie held each other close, grateful for the twist of fate that had finally brought them together. Their announcement would make headlines tomorrow, but they'd already told the story that mattered. In roses left at dawn, in dances shared under Paris stars, in a night of passion born from a medical mix-up that showed them what really mattered. "I love you," Patrick whispered against Rosalie's hair. "No more hiding, no more pretending." "I love you too," she replied, her kiss tasting of promise and forever. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The night deepened around them as they stood wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts beating in perfect sync. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new chapters in their epic romance. But tonight they had this moment, this love, this perfect understanding born from a beautiful mistake. Their story would become legend in the business world, a reminder that sometimes the heart knows better than the head, that love finds a way despite our best efforts to deny it. The stars emerged above Manhattan, blessing their love story that had begun with a mix-up and blossomed into something beautiful and true. Sometimes, they were learning, the biggest mistakes lead to the most perfect endings, or rather, the most perfect beginnings. Chapter 12. Forever After the King. Technology's building glowed like a jewel in the Manhattan twilight, its windows reflecting the golden sunset. Inside, the usually pristine offices had been transformed into an enchanted garden. Roses in every shade of red and pink cascaded from crystal vases, their perfume filling the air with romance. Rosalie stood in her former office, now converted into a bridal suite. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, designed to complement her dark skin perfectly. Her natural curls were crowned with tiny white flowers, and tears of joy sparkled in her eyes as she looked out over the city where their love story had begun. "Ready, my dear?" Mrs. Chen appeared at the door, dabbing her own eyes. The elderly receptionist had insisted on being Rosalie's honorary mother for the day. In Patrick's office-turned-groom suite, he adjusted his bow tie for the 100th time. Through the glass walls that had witnessed so many longing glances, he could see the gathering crowd in the transformed executive floor. Their wedding venue choice had raised eyebrows in society circles, but nowhere else felt right. These halls had watched them fall in love, had contained their secret glances and hidden desires. Now they would witness their final transformation from secret lovers to husband and wife. The guest list was a testament to their unique love story. The entire King Technologies staff was there, all having contributed to the celebration in some way. Claire had organized the flowers, ensuring a rose on every surface, a callback to Patrick's daily gifts. The IT department had created a stunning digital display of their romance, including security footage of Patrick's early morning rose deliveries. Patrick Smith and his wife sat in places of honor. His cancer was in remission, his face glowing with health and joy. The medical report that had started everything was framed in gold, hanging beside their marriage license. two pieces of paper that had changed their lives forever. As the string quartet began to play, Patrick took his place beneath an arch of roses. His heart thundered in anticipation, remembering a similar racing pulse the night Rosalie had come to his door in that black silk dress, grief and love warring in her eyes. The office fell silent as Rosalie appeared. She was a vision in ivory, but it was her radiant smile that took Patrick's breath away. She walked toward him between rows of their colleagues, friends and family, each step bringing them closer to their perfect ending. Their vows were personal, filled with references that made their guests laugh and cry. Patrick promised to never hide his feelings behind professional distance again. Rosalie vowed to always read any medical reports that came his way, just in case. They both promised to love each other through every beautiful mistake and perfect moment to come. "I knew from our first interview," Patrick said, his voice rough with emotion, "that you would change my life. I just didn't know how completely you would change my heart." "You left me roses every morning," Rosalie replied, tears sparkling in her eyes, "but the most beautiful gift was your love." The reception was a blend of elegant sophistication and personal touches. Each table was named after a significant moment in their romance: the Paris table, the storm table, the medical mix-up table. The cake featured a delicate sugar sculpture of the King Technologies building, where their love had bloomed. Their first dance was set against the Manhattan skyline, the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Patrick held Rosalie close, remembering their dance in Paris, all the moments they'd almost given in to their feelings. "No more almost moments," he whispered in her ear, "just a lifetime of love." Later, they snuck away to his office balcony, the same spot where they'd shared so many charged moments. The spring air was sweet with possibility as they looked out over their city. "Happy, Mrs. King?" Patrick asked, wrapping his arms around his bride. "Perfectly," Rosalie replied, leaning back against his chest, "though I'm keeping Rose professionally. Can't have people thinking I slept my way into operations management." He laughed, the sound full of joy and love. "You mean our beautiful mistake didn't get you the job?" "No," she turned in his arms, eyes sparkling, "but it got me everything else that matters." The celebration continued into the night, their love story echoing through the halls that had witnessed its evolution. Their colleagues shared stories of watching their romance unfold, of betting on when they'd finally admit their feelings, of celebrating silently as love found its way. Mrs. Chen gave a tearful toast, recounting how she'd watched them fall in love through glass walls and stolen glances. The Smith spoke about fate's strange workings, about how a medical mix-up had created two stronger couples. As midnight approached, Patrick and Rosalie prepared to leave for their honeymoon. But first, they had a tradition to maintain. Together, they placed a single red rose on Rosalie's old desk, a reminder of how their love had begun. "Ready for our next chapter?" Patrick asked, taking his wife's hand. "With you?" "Always," Rosalie replied, her smile radiant with love and joy. They left amid a shower of rose petals, their hearts full of love and gratitude for the beautiful mistake that had brought them together. Their story would live forever in the halls of King Technologies, a reminder that sometimes the biggest mix-ups lead to the most perfect endings. As their car pulled away from the building, Rosalie looked back at the glowing tower where their love had bloomed. "It's not really an ending, is it?" "No, my love," Patrick replied, pulling her close. "It's the most perfect beginning." And so began their greatest adventure. A love story that had started with a medical report delivered to the wrong Patrick and blossomed into something beautiful and true. Their tale would be told for years to come, a reminder that love finds a way, that fate works in mysterious ways, and that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from unexpected mistakes. The end. Subscribe if you loved.